Welcome to the Free World Podcast. Today we have a guest here, Rob Potter. Is right? Rob Potter?
Yes,
Yeah, that's right.
And then we have Drew, of course, and then we have Joe. So the whole team is here. But first,
Great.
maybe Rob, you can introduce yourself, who you are, what do you do, what is your favorite soup, and so on.
I definitely like vatnik soup, and I have to admit that while it never makes me very popular in Ukraine, I'm not a huge fan of borscht. So I apologize. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Not a huge fan of borscht, but originally Australian, worked in Parliament House for a number of the Australian government ministers. Worked in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which is our diplomatic service for a little while. Ex-Australian Army. Went to BAE Systems as their head of cyber, spent a bunch of time fighting North Korean hackers, Chinese hackers, then left, was head of cyber at the Washington Post, now running a couple of cybersecurity companies, an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, where we train Ukrainian veterans. So we take veterans who are injured at the front line, and we train them in useful cybersecurity skills and put them back to work, mostly in the Ukrainian intelligence services. We basically take guys who can't fight in the front and still want to make a contribution and give them useful skills that will help them both during the war and then after. So we trained, I think on average, around about 2,000 people a month through that program.
I was going to say, really cool story. Like, Rob lived in North Korea for 6 months as well, and we've been mates for a while. I went with Rob last month to the front lines in Ukraine, and we were looking at drones, and met with the head of Ukraine's drone service. So definitely we'll have to talk about that in this episode.
So yeah, as Drew said, you have been to Ukraine many times, and you are there right now, right? You are.
That's right. I spent about 6 months of my year here.
So you experienced the Russia's peace proposal of Shaheds and ballistic missiles last night. Have you had any sleep? And how was it?
Not
how
really.
was the experience?
It was very loud last night. That was they spent a lot of Iskanders. Iskanders make a special noise that you can tell from other ballistic impacts. Last night was an intense night. Yeah, Putin is a psychopath. Basically, he's like, oh, you don't want to give up Crimea, go dig your kids out of the rubble. Like, that's what we're dealing with, and it's not. It doesn't seem to be clear enough to everyone, even though it's absolutely obvious to everyone who's been through a Russian missile barrage targeting Ukraine civilians, that the aim is just to terrify people. Most of it gets shot down. The aim isn't to effectively use those weapons to take out military targets. That's nonsense. It's just to scare people, right? So if they really wanted to hurt defense installations, they'd be firing them at the front line, but they don't really do that.
Rob, I did that like sort of podcast debate with Willie OAM the other day, and he's got like a kind of Mearsheimer type realist position, and he was trying to say to me, oh, look, like the Russians have a pretty low regard for civilian casualties when they're looking for military targets and stuff like that. But that was his kind of like take, like that they're mainly targeting military installations, but they just have, a higher threshold for enduring civilian casualties, like as though it's just an accident for them. But I mean, that's absolutely not what I saw when I was with you in the east, when I saw Dobropilia.
They double tap a team in Dobropilia, like you saw, right? When they literally drop a second rocket into the facility to try and kill the guys that are the first responders, trying to kill the medics. That's not just having a low regard. That's deliberately targeting. Like, anyone who's making that argument is probably in an information bubble of some sort, or at least in a bubble of normalizing the lack of empathy of what goes on here. There's no both sides to it, right? When they double tap a military, even whatever was there the first time, it's usually a bloody Khrushchevka apartment built in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like,
that's what
when you see the blasted buildings, it's always apartment blocks, right? And then when they just do the second strike, like, that's not a military decision. That's we're going to cripple as many ambulance workers as we can, because they know that the most important and thing in the incident response after one of these strikes is these guys are insane. You see on Telegram, the calls go out for first responders and doctors, and they say, which district are you in, doctors? Get in contact with us and just come out and help. And the first responders are on site while the missiles are still coming in, right? And right, that's when they're saving the most lives. That's one of the reasons why Ukraine's civilian casualty rates from military strikes is so much lower than people would naturally expect. It's because like as soon as the first rocket's on, they're in there digging people out in those critical minutes, basically straight away. And Russia's double tap strategy is designed to terrify those first responders, to make them think twice about going in straight into the buildings to rescue the kids after they've been hit. That's not a low regard for civilian casualties. That's a deliberate attempt to undermine the first responders and to target them and terrify them into not showing up in those first precious minutes and hours after those strikes. So I think anyone that's making those arguments about, oh yeah, Russians are going to Russian, that those people just need to just sit down and talk to people who are doing those first responses, and then really get their empathy back in check and switch it on and realize what they're dealing with here. Because I think you can get like a little bit too used to what's going on here. You say, oh yeah, 8 missiles, 100 shaheeds. Okay, call me when it's 300, right? Like that's you see that media. The media, right? They only report it if it's a record, if it's Usain Bolt running for the record, right? They miss the day-to-day brutality of the constant attacks on the cities, and then worse when it's close to the front line when they can use the glide bombs, and then worse again when they can use, like in Nikopol, this little insanely brave city on the other side of the Dnipro River that nobody's ever heard about. This just happens to be an artillery range and just gets smashed, right? And then Kherson, which has got to be the bravest city in the world. Where the Russians are literally just hunting people with drones in the streets. And like, tell me that's just a low regard for civilian casualties in when they're going after military targets. That's nonsense.
Yeah. We literally saw that in Kherson, like literally a month ago. Hey, Rob, like, and
we got shot by a T-72 while walking down the street.
And you were there as well, like right after the dam was blown up as well, like with the flooding. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they shelled us again because they knew there were a bunch of first responders delivering aid. Right?
It's also worth pointing out, it never works. It's worth pointing out, it never works. We have accounts from the Blitz when the Germans bombed London. It didn't make the British want to surrender. It rallied them harder behind the war. And in every case where a country decides, okay, we're just going to do indiscriminate bombings of civilians, it never has the intended result. And you can see that yourself. You go on social media every morning after every bombing during the night. What do you see the Ukrainians do? They're more committed than before.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. It's pointless. It's a pointless cruelty. That's what makes this so much worse in many ways. I really, really hope that when all of this is over, the people responsible, we know who some of the people are responsible for, especially the what are they called? You just said the Kinzhals, the strikes with the missiles.
Yeah.
The teams that make the targeting and all that. I really hope to see some of these people eventually in a courtroom.
I hope they go for I hope the Ukrainians
eventually.
It's really sad though that none of that is in the debate right now, right? Like everyone's talking about ceasefire, and I'm for the war ending on just terms, right? But we're never going to give up on justice here, right? What has happened here is unforgivable. It's been going on for so long, defunding the justice effort. So one of the projects, if you're a young lawyer who wants to help and you're sitting in law school, get in contact with the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice and the Office of the General Prosecutor and just volunteer your time. There is so much information out there that needs to be sorted for cases, and it needs to be done digitally as well. So I'll give you a great example of how AI is actually erasing human rights abuse evidence. So when a strike happens, immediately everyone uploads that stuff onto social media, goes onto Google Pictures, gets flagged as sensitive content and deleted. So there's this window, right, where the evidence is posted and then the tech companies come through and delete it. So if you want to create, if you're looking to create an amazing platform that's going to help a lot of people, create a platform that is downloading those images right now, because no one's cracked this, right? Because you've got a wave of technical censorship that just goes across all of that imagery of violence because they don't want people to casually interact with it. Which there is a good argument for that, but this is a massively negative unintended result where you actually are you're essentially using that as a byproduct. You censor a lot of that information, and so you're technically deleting a lot of what is going to be hugely useful evidence in human rights investigations going forward, and in trials of war crimes. So we're accidentally deleting more evidence than we're preserving at the moment, and this is a huge technical problem. And then there's huge amounts of justice documentation that needs to be tabled across courts around the world. So if you're a young lawyer who wants to just go full Atticus Finch and do a Drew Pavlou and just find a cause, then this would be one to get involved in. Learn Ukrainian or master Google Translate, learn Russian, and start kind of helping with the processing of these cases. You'll make your career out of it.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, what was it like last night, Rob, with the inbound barrage? Like, do we know the extent of the casualties yet? Because I was reading posts about entire residential buildings collapsing, etc., and it was this was really one of the worst ones in the war.
It's really hard when you can't shoot it down. It's hard, right? And if someone shoots 8 Iskanders at your city, you're just going to overwhelm the air defenses, right? So we don't know yet.
I saw the Iskander ballistic missile strike in Dobropilia, and it's like 10 meters deep. Like when you see it, you can't ever forget that. It's crazy. It really is it's almost unsurvivable if it hits.
Yeah, you see the building in Dnipro in it was late 2022, early 23, where a ballistic, whereas the first time we'd seen a hypersonic hit a civilian apartment building, and it basically ripped a hole, like it was ripping through a cardboard box, and you can see refrigerators and kitchen appliances are just sitting there because it was such a clean, brutal strike.
8 floors up. Perched
and it's just ripped a hole, the section out of the building, and then 2 feet from the blast to the left, the plates are still standing.
Yeah, fucking hell.
So it's
there's no point. It's just pointless. I mean, they have, of course. I mean, they use double taps also in Syria. It's a terror bombing thing, like Joe said. But I mean, Joe, maybe you can talk more about about this history of these operations.
They refined all of this in Syria. There's a lot of accounts on social media that can put it. There was this incident, which is kind of infamous, where they were trying to sell the Iskander missile to Armenia. And the Armenians sort of were like, "Oh, we don't know how accurate they are." And the Russians, and I'm not making this up, they used the targeting of a hospital, which they filmed with everything, as an example of how accurate their missiles are, the Iskander missiles is. So, look, we can blow up hospitals in Syria with these missiles. That's how accurate they are. And it was sort of it also fell into the propaganda thing that they did, because they bombed this hospital. They showed footage of them bombing the hospital, and then they denied that they bombed hospitals at the same time while they were doing that. In Syria, what they specifically did, it was very deliberate. Hospitals, refugee camps were bombed specifically to terrorize people into submission, which didn't work. And when that didn't work, they just continued and doubled down on it. Specifically, they went more, they just flattened entire neighborhoods specifically to drive people out. So if you don't get terrorized into surrendering, we'll at least drive you out into leaving, right? And that's how these big refugee camps in northwest Syria came to be. The thing that happened in the long term is these people never left. They stayed in Syria, they armed, they trained, and took their country back down the road.
Yeah, from Idlib. Yeah, it's crazy. They have this strategy of
the tactics that they used, though, the tactics that the Russians used against civilians in Syria, we are seeing these right now in Ukraine. The double tap, the deliberate targeting of hospitals, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the terrorizing of civilians. What they are doing in Kherson right now, what you mentioned with the human safaris, as they're called, they want these people to leave. They want to take over the ruins. They don't care if the people are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's to empty the city. I mean, what were your observations when we were in Kherson, Rob? What struck you? I'm interested in what you thought when we went to Kherson.
But Kherson's a deliberate targeting of civilians for a couple of reasons. And if you look at the river, there are those islands that sit between the two sides. And so if there is a circumstance where the Russians are able to do drone operations from those islands, they can inflict more civilian casualties. So at the moment, the areas they can hit, that's where we're getting the footage of the human safaris near the bridge to the east and on the island part of the city to the southwest. But if they're able to get onto that island in the riverine area, they'll be able to project their drone operations further into the city and impact more civilians. So what that's doing is it's actually holding the civilian population there hostage, which then forces the Ukrainians to maintain operations on the islands where they're more vulnerable and they take more casualties. So if the Ukrainians want to stop those civilian casualties, the Russians are drawing them into a situation where they have to fight for what are reasonably useless islands. It's a terrible place to fight, right? Because if you get hit by a drone and you're on that island, your medevac case study is you're going to be waiting potentially days to be pulled out of that situation. You cannot be easily evacuated because you've got to go back over the water to get to first aid. So we're seeing guys who are coming back from those frontline environments who have had a tourniquet on for so long that their arms are mummified.
Oh my
right?
God.
So like but that's a deliberate strategy by the Russians to try and draw Ukrainian forces into a circumstance where they have to fight on terrain that they don't want to have to fight on, because there's no military objective to holding those little crappy islands except to stop the Russians doing drone ops from them. So because you can't sustain artillery operations from those islands particularly easily because the shipments are too heavy to move onto the islands. But if you can get FPVs and wire guided drones there, you can do significant damage to civilian areas in the city. So that's a deliberate strategy, right? To kind of force the Ukrainians out of defensive positions into areas where they have to fight offensively against Russians, reinforcing across really horrendous logistics environments to fight for a piece of territory where basically for the sole purpose of protecting the civilians that live in Kherson.
Wow.
So that's the kind of insane homicidal logic of Russian operations, where they can use the civilians as a hostage point. And one of the reasons they do that, the attacks on Kyiv, for example, is because it keeps the Patriot batteries in Kyiv and Dnipro. Right?
Yeah.
Those Patriot batteries at the front line could be shooting down attacks and disrupting Russian aviation operations at the front line.
Yeah.
But by smacking babushkas in the city, they're pulling a huge amount of air defense capability away from the front end to cover Ukraine's critical infrastructure cities, to keep the electricity on during the winter so people don't freeze to death, to keep the water services running, and to keep people safe in their homes at night. And so Ukraine is forced to take these deliberate decisions to sacrifice soldiers to protect civilians. I mean, that's the job of a soldier. I used to be one. That they're like, the soldier takes that deal every day, right? Every day, and says, "My sister, her kids are not getting hit. I'm going to stand at the front line." Right? That's insanely honourable, and we're hugely grateful to those Ukrainian soldiers that just make that decision every day to take that additional risk. They go, "I'm going to fight that island, even if there's no medevac." And I met guys that were in Kherson who were just popping pills because of the amount of concussions that they've had from getting FPV'd for years, not just months on campaign, but years on campaign. It was just insanely brave. But this is the logic of the civilian attacks: is it's stringing out the massive pressure on the air defense capabilities of Ukraine and drawing that capability away from the front line so that Russians can kill more soldiers.
Fuck, that's crazy. I mean, I'm interested, Pekka and Krat, have you ever tried a tourniquet before? Because like when I was going out to the east with Rob, like the medic on our team like made me try it, and it actually hurts so much to put it on because you have to put it on so tight that like your arm feels like it's gonna.
I've never tried, and I hope I never have to.
Yeah, but dude, I was thinking though, like the fact that like these guys have had them on for days, I can't even imagine, right? Like it like was killing me to put it on, even for just like a short while. Like that's crazy.
What I was just thinking, it sort of struck me what I guess it just told us. Is that this what the Russians do, using basically the ability to hurt Ukrainians as a thing to hold the Ukrainian army at bay and hostage, like using Ukrainian civilians as hostages? It would not work in reverse. Let's say hypothetically, if the Ukrainians just started bombing Russian civilians tomorrow, right, which they won't do, but let's hypothetically say they would, the Russian government wouldn't give a damn. It wouldn't give a damn. They don't
Do
care
they,
about the civilians right now, right? It's
Just listening to all this, I'm just there's more confirmation for me that almost all Russian strategy is built around cruelty, is built around suffering. Like everything that they do is just maximize the suffering of Ukrainians. I mean, of course, there's no glory in war in general, but all these strategies, they are just like how to maximize suffering. And it's just unbelievable to me. And I think it's great that Ukraine is kind of following these Geneva guidelines and so, well, not guidelines, but Geneva conventions. But it also makes the war asymmetric because Russia can use these extremely cruel strategies to attack Ukrainians, whereas Ukraine has to kind of, they have this framework where they have to operate. But this is something that is probably very, very difficult for Ukrainians.
It's how terrorists operate. Literally terrorists.
Exactly. Yeah, Russia is a terrorist state. I mean, I think that's obvious at this point. But maybe we can move on to the ridiculous peace proposal from the Trump administration. How, Rob, you are there. How has it been received, like in Ukraine?
I have the downside of having friends in the administration, so I don't want to who are like, there are good people. I just want to say there are good people in the US government, right? There are even good staffers in the administration, but it is a disordered administration, right? So I will kind of preface my response by saying there are two interpretations for everything: maliciousness and incompetence. I lean towards the fact that this situation is not one that the administration has been able to adequately respond to, because it just doesn't really understand the adversary, doesn't understand Russia, and certainly it just doesn't. It doesn't have the literacy and the history and the kind of the diplomatic muscle to move things correctly, and so they resort to these frustrated yelling arguments that do nobody any good. So, like when you see Trump screaming at people on Truth Social, reposted everywhere, like that frustration is a lack of leverage and a lack of, why isn't everyone just doing what I want? Why can't everyone just go home? Well, no, because we're not dealing with fully rational actors in the case of the Russians. They're not making fully rational decisions, at least as we would understand them to be fully rational.
Yes.
Like an ultra cynic like Amir Sharma would say that actually Putin's incredibly rational, but within a certain construct. I wouldn't agree with that. I've spent too much time in these countries like EPRK, China and Russia, to think that they're fully rational. There is a vindictiveness to it as well, that isn't rational. Like there is a diversion when you're diverting as many resources as the Russians are to hurting civilians. It's not rational. You can't actually get there through a construct. But I'm looking at the negotiations and I think there's too much focus on what the Ukrainians will accept. I don't think even the deal that I saw the Russians would accept. Right? I just don't see it. Right? Like, so everyone's like, oh, Zell, you're keeping the war going. You keep the war going. Well, no, he's accepted like every ceasefire proposal that's been put in front of him. Right? Yeah. He's had to have his arm twisted because they're on incredibly unfavorable terms to Ukraine. Yeah. But he was elected as a peace president, and he hasn't forgotten that. Right? He was elected with a mandate. He's from the East. Right? Yeah. He'd say center, but now Creepy Rig is pretty close to the front. He was elected by the Russian-speaking population of the country, and he was a peace candidate. He's always wanted a deal. I think Butcher changed the construct of the war so completely. When you saw that, like, a lot of Ukrainians thought that it was a brothers' war until they saw Butcher. They're like, oh yeah, Russia, we'll fight them. Great, we'll line up in the fields and shoot at each other, and it'll be an honorable fight. But you've also got to remember that most Ukrainians grew up with an understanding of World War II history that was completely censored. Right? They didn't learn about the Soviet violence during the campaign as they came into Germany. Like Nazis were evil, but the Russian violence is long-standing against civilians. They've always been a brutal occupier, and they were pretty brutal when they came through Poland and Germany. But that history was never taught to Ukrainians, right? And they only really worked it out after Butcher, and they were so outraged by it. And I just don't think you can do a long-term deal. I just don't think it's even remotely possible that Ukraine would give up territory. I don't think it's remotely possible that anything I think everyone would take a deal, ceasefire, we go home, we dig better trenches, we dig in, we give ourselves security guarantees, we get
DMZ
some foreign
style.
peacekeepers in or something. I think Ukraine takes that deal.
Like
and if
types
yeah, potentially. But then you've
Yeah.
still got all these occupied Ukrainians that you have to deal with who are just going to be who are going to be subject to horrendous human rights abuses, right?
Yeah.
And so even if you accept that deal, which just tremendously sucks, we're talking about the kids getting stolen.
Yeah.
We're talking about everyone's property getting divvied up. Like the Russian oligarchs have lists of everyone's property in the country that's worth anything more than nothing, right? And there's a reason why certain things haven't been hit is because certain oligarchs in Russia are going like, oh, I want that, this is going to be mine. It's not because they're holding back from attacking Ukraine. It's because they're like, no, they want the stuff when it's over. And I'm looking at the negotiations and like a ceasefire on the front lines with a security guarantee for Ukraine, and the EU membership and peacekeepers as presented by the administration. I haven't seen Russia say yes to that.
They wouldn't.
They won't.
Yeah. So why are we talking about what Zell will accept when we've not got anything that the Russians will accept? If the deal is dead in the Kremlin, why are we arguing about what Zell's going for?
He's reluctant to put any pressure whatsoever on Russia at all. Like not even a tiny amount to get any leverage over Russia. It's really strange.
I think the strategy is completely contradictory in that you cannot withdraw military aid to Ukraine and push for peace at the same time, right? Because all that's going to do is think what Putin is thinking at the moment. If you get inside his rationale for this year is the Americans are out, the Europeans may not be in. Ukraine is maybe the Europeans cover the bill, maybe they don't. I'll probably get the same deal in 6 months' time. Why not go for another summer campaign?
And they're recruiting 30,000 a month.
Yeah, and that'd be the strategy. And Putin's going, well, the deal's not going to get worse in 6 months' time for me. I might blow through some of my cash, a bunch of innocent people will get killed, but those aren't things that I care about.
Yeah.
If there's no pressure on my front line, if the Americans are out, this is a strategic win in 2025. Why would I waste it?
I know. Yeah, exactly.
So he's going to go as his strictly dominant strategy. If you're min-maxing for evil, is go hard this year.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
And so I don't think there's anything about the approach of diplomacy at the moment that is pushing the Russians towards a decision. And I think the discussion about what Zelensky is willing to accept is a distraction from reality.
Yeah.
They're whacking people they have leverage on and not really addressing the core problem, which is that if the US is out of the war, the strategy for Russia will be to double down at least for another campaign season.
Yeah.
To see if they can move the front line, get into the Dnipro Oblast, try and get their claws into another section of the Ukrainian territory, try and finally capture more parts of Donbass. They don't really care if it costs 100,000 people to roll the dice for another campaign season. I think and nothing about the negotiations is pushing Putin off of that, making that decision. So I think we focus on what Ukraine has to give up and how one-sided things are. Annexing Crimea, obviously that's a non-starter constitutionally in Ukraine. That just can't happen. But a deal where they accept temporary occupation, as part of a ceasefire, Ukraine would accept that. They've already said that. Moving towards legal recognition, I haven't seen enough. They just can't do that in Ukraine. It's not legally possible.
No, there's nothing like that we can demand because the Russian demands are still maximalist. They still demand, this denazification of Ukraine, which is like this rubber term, which means they still want to, they still want all of it. They still demand all of it. They still demand all of Ukraine. It's important.
Well, they are at this time, right? So if you're thinking you're Putin and you think the deal's going to be the same in 6 months' time, and maybe you can take some more territory because the Americans are not supplying Ukraine, then if you're setting your negotiation point with the Americans, you would say, well, if the deal's going to be the same in 6 months, and I think I'm going to be in a slightly better position in 6 months' time, if you want me to quit now, you have to give me more.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's saying within his bargaining position, because of the way that the position has been framed for him, because there isn't this huge pressure on him to get out of the fight, because he's not looking down the barrel of another 60 billion in US aid coming in here, more capability, his ammunition advantage. He's living on North Korean ammo and borrowed time out of his national capital reserves. Those things are not at the front of his mind right now because he knows that the deal's the same in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
Right? He knows he just ring up Trump and go, oh, yeah, like now's the time. Let's do a deal. And Trump will be like, yeah, mate, no worries. Let's get same deal. Cool. We'll sign it. So his strategy is now, if you want me to quit now, when I think when I think things are trending my way, because I want to test what the removal of America from the war is going to look like on the ground, because we don't know. My feeling is the Ukrainians are in a stronger position than they look. They've had years to dig trenches and get their defenses up. I think they're going to potentially overperform our expectations in defense. And we've seen like the initial parts of the Russian offensive this spring. It's just been stopped dead. Like, this is not last year. The Ukrainians are much better prepared to fight a defensive fight now on reduced resources. But if you want Putin to quit now, his ask is, well, I want more because the deal's going to be the same in 6 months' time and I might be in a better position.
Can I ask you, Rob? I had this podcast debate with Willie OEM. I still think you should go on and have an actual debate with him. It'd be really interesting. His whole argument to me was, well, it's an attritional war. Russia is just Russia. If it's an attritional war, therefore Russia is automatically favored. The longer it goes on, the worse it gets for Ukraine. He kept on saying that there's inevitably going to basically be a breakthrough through the front lines. And therefore, for Ukraine to avoid a complete collapse, they should immediately hand over the entire Donbass. Like, that was Willie OM saying that to me. And I just can't understand it, right? Because Russia in 11 years has not been able to conquer the Donbass. They started in 2014. They were in Slovyansk in 2014. Today in 2025, Slovyansk is still in Ukrainian hands. So why would Ukraine hand over that territory? It just doesn't compute, right?
Well, but if Ukraine gives away the Donbass, the remaining parts of it, like Pokrovsk and all those other bits,
Dobropilia,
if they give it up, aside from the fact that those lovely people who were serving us pizza are now living under Russian occupation, which I don't want. And like those are like, they're kids in Donbass. They're like people going to school in Dobropilia, right? These are real humans that you're literally like, maybe you give that, maybe you get off. Like, this is not a fucking Hearts of Iron campaign, right?
Yeah, exactly,
and too many of these idiots are treating it like it's the Hearts of Iron campaign and they can just shadow box the strategy with zero invested of themselves, right? So I get a bit dismissive of these people who treat it like they're playing Civ 4 and they're like, oh, back in my day, we could have done it this way, but that's not what Putin's offering. Putin is not offering that deal. He's saying, I want Kherson and Zaporizhia, right? Kherson and Zaporizhia, and 2 beachheads on the other side of the Dnipro River. If you want me to quit now, that's the deal.
They could never accept that. Like, no, I said this to Willie OEM, right? I said, even from within say you took the most cold-blooded rational calculus, we didn't look at all about the morality of handing over all these civilians who currently live under Ukrainian rule. Let's just look at the most purely realist calculus. Ukrainians are thinking we have to preserve the survival of our state. Even the most purely rational, reasonable, that pure, sort of Mearsheimer type calculus where you're putting no morality into it at all. No Ukrainian administration ever could allow 2 beachheads over the Dnipro that the Russians currently do not have, because that's like suicide. That's national suicide. If you give them a beachhead over the Dnipro, that just means in a couple of years' time when they restart the war, they can just plunge right into the heart of Ukraine so easily. Because the Dnipro is the big main defensive line. It's like an inland sea when you see it in person.
I would suggest that we shouldn't be like, it's not useful to discuss theoretical deals that the
Yeah.
Russians are not offering.
Yeah.
Right.
True. Yeah.
Like, so guys like Willie have a optimized view of their ability to negotiate and a suboptimal view of understanding what the real world looks like and what the Russians are actually offering to quit right now. Saying offer them Donbass, offer them Luhansk, maybe they'll take that deal. Well, they've been offered that. They would have been offered that 50 times by Witkoff in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, probably.
Right?
Yeah.
And the reason we're not hearing about it is because it's not a deal for them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So just park the theoretical stuff.
Yeah,
All right, these guys who are playing Hearts of Iron on YouTube, watching the war and trying to make predictions like this, not Betfair. It's real war. We're not the decision makers. We're not the Ukrainians. I'm not Zelensky. It's not my place to tell him what he should sell. I'm just telling him that deal ain't on the table. Like, you're shadowboxing fantasy football if you think that the Russians are going to take just Donbass and Luhansk and walk away from this thing and say, hey, bro, we're friends now. Let's get this trade going again. That's just not how the world's going to work. That's fiction.
Where do we go from here? I want to ask, where do we go from here? Trump will probably abandon Ukraine. There's clear signs of that. I know you want to be diplomatic, but I'm just going to throw it out there. US is out. Europe will have to take care of all this. We really don't know. And you said we shouldn't theorize, but just want to, how do you see the near future? Let's say 1 year from now on, US is out, and what's going to happen?
I think Ukraine had this weird moment in January where everyone was a bit scared of what it would be like if they were really alone without America, right? And the Band-Aid has come off and on and off and on so many times, and now they're kind of, that shock is over here, right? We don't know yet what the impact of the air defense is going to be, because the key question is, what does America being out actually mean? No one really has answered that. Now, we've kind of got two strategic futures that I think are in play diplomatically for an American exit. One is like a softer exit where they're not donating ammo. There's still the intel feeds are on, the AWACS are running missions, giving targeting information to the Ukrainians, and the platforms that are in service are maintained, right? So you've got hundreds of American vehicles in service in the Ukrainian armed forces. Those are still being serviced in some capacity, either being paid for by the Americans or paid for by the Europeans. But then we have a different version, which we've seen a hint of coming through, which is not even American stuff is for sale.
Yeah.
Right. We saw Zell go to Trump and say, I want to buy $50 billion worth of Patriot missiles to shoot down stuff attacking my cities. Trump said no. Now, that's an indicator that things could have a lot worse to go, because even the European air defense systems run on AIM-120s for the most part, which are American-made missiles. So those AMRAAMs need to come from America, whether they're supporting a German launcher or an American launcher. So eventually the Americans are going to have to sell those air defense missiles or not. And that's a cleavage point where I think real diplomacy, if I'm Ukraine, that's where I'm investing my diplomacy right now. Not theoretical diplomacy, like actual resources. Keep those markets open to us. We will pay you with real dollars.
Yeah.
They might be Russian dollars that are escrowed Russian assets that are sanctioned. But that's what if I'm Ukrainian diplomat, I'm not asking Congress for a package of aid, but I'm really negotiating hard to keep American arms markets open for European purchases so that they can purchase American equipment for Ukrainian service. Now, there is a version where that diplomacy goes really badly at the moment, and the Americans block those arms shipments. That will have billions of dollars in losses across the American arms markets. Like, that is Lockheed, Boeing getting smashed in European markets. You can see that in the stock market at the moment, where companies that are both European and American, like BAE, are doing very well. Rheinmetall doing spectacularly well. Lockheed, not so great. And I think there's a lot of risk adjusting because no one has ever thought of a scenario where American supply of equipment would ever stop for a platform that you had in service.
Yeah.
So far, the only people that have ever really played that game has been the French. So Australia had Mirage fighters during Vietnam, and the French stopped supply of equipment to support that platform during the Vietnam War because
They
they're
did
like,
that to
ideologically,
Israel.
we're against this, and they walked away from the platform. So, and we have an example of what that looked like for French arms manufacturing in Australia. We never bought anything again from them, except the submarines, which we then cancelled. Right? We just don't buy stuff from France after having that experience, because you can't have your when you're living on an island, you can't have your ammo run out and the parts not come in. But that's the real question. If I'm a diplomat and I'm sitting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I'm Shabina and I'm negotiating with the Americans, I'm putting my main effort on that. If I'm working with Keir Starmer, that's where the effort is. It's to keep the supply of those AIM-120s coming in. It's to keep the supply of parts for the Bradleys coming in. If you have to chuck all the Bradleys in a ditch, that sucks. Maybe the Australia situation, we'll get to it, is Abrams. Australia donated 49 Abrams tanks to Ukraine.
Part of that deal.
Yeah, I helped broker the request from the Ukrainians on that one. But if those parts and supplies for those platforms, then they could just be 5 minutes in the battlefield, a track breaks, and there isn't anywhere to send it to be fixed. So that's what I'm really concerned about, is a hard American exit from Ukraine, more so than I am a soft exit. Like, everyone in Ukraine has already kind of risk adjusted what a soft exit looks like. No more aid. Okay, Europe, maybe they come to the table, maybe they don't. But there are different versions of worse that could happen if we get this really wrong in the next few months, where those markets could be closed to Ukraine, and key platforms that are already in service, that have been built into the Ukrainian service, whole brigades that are running on American equipment, could suddenly run out of spare parts. And
I want to quote some. Sorry to disturb. I want to quote some news or rumors that I read last night. This is from X Twitter. The U.S. has banned Germany from transferring Taurus missiles to Ukraine, citing the fact that they contain critical American elements. Have you heard the same? Or
yeah, so there are parts of the Taurus that require American ITAR clearance for sale. Because a lot of these platforms, they're a German missile, right? Contain parts from American suppliers. And we've seen this in other deals. For example, in the F-18 deal, which I was involved in, which didn't go ahead in Ukraine for a lot of reasons, most of them bad, involve parts from Israel, for example. And Israel would have had to sign off on part of the deal. So you just have to accept that one platform has multiple components in it, different systems in it. You don't have to strip those systems out and put new systems in, because there's no such thing as a fully indigenous capability unless it's a North Korean one built after 1991. Even Iranian Shaheds have Chinese guidance systems in them. And if you're doing this legally, which Ukraine does, you've got a lot of sign-offs from a lot of countries that need to happen in order for something to go into production and service. So this is where I get really concerned, is if I'm a Ukrainian diplomat and you're switching from American suppliers to European suppliers, you have gradations of awful if the Americans start blocking things. So obviously Taurus, they don't support strikes into Russia. Under the Trump administration, they've said that multiple times, that they don't want this. So Ukraine has developed indigenous platforms to do that. It's got long-range Palinitsya capabilities, long-range drone capabilities, essentially Shahed copies that they make and they throw at defense facilities in Russia. But within things like Taurus, which is a complex system built on an assumption that America and Europe were always together in alignment over the use of systems, that is no longer true. Wow. Now we're going to see where the real value of international diplomacy comes in to get those approvals done. And if America is super pissed and super vindictive, they can hold up huge supplies of European equipment and imperil the continuous combat operations of American platforms in service in Ukraine.
See, the thing is, like, I mean, obviously, that's something we have to consider, right? The other thing is, if if they actually do that, that's like, I know we've already talked about this before, and I think Kratz said to me, like, he thinks already you can basically say the transatlantic alliance is over. But if they were to do that, like, there's no coming back. Like, that's really, Trump would have to think hard about that, because that's endgame, right? If he does that,
it was over. I didn't say it was over. I'm just saying that we in Europe got caught with a pants down, being disarmed, and that there's more onus on us to be better armed, better prepared for something like this happening again. That's all that I'm saying.
Yeah, but this would
Totally
be
agree.
though. This would really be full game over if they did that, though. How do you come back from that?
Well, I think it's not there yet. I think this is where the real diplomacy will have an impact, right? This is where if you're a really competent Ukrainian diplomat, and there are a lot of really competent Ukrainian diplomats, this is where you are pushing through Germany with Merz coming in, with Starmer, who has good relations with Italy, with good relationships into the US government. You need to be making these cases in a very articulate way, pointing out what the implications are, making sure that the impacts are fully anticipated, right? I mean, Lockheed doesn't want to lose the European market.
Yeah,
like there isn't just, you've got but these wheels spin at different speeds, right? So the president spins fast on social media, things can happen quickly there. Lockheed spins slowly. They're on sometimes 10 to 50 year procurement cycles, but Lockheed doesn't want to get locked out of the European market. So but these wheels that spin more slowly also spin more decisively, and you'll see there are ways to activate those lobbying capabilities through the Europeans to keep those platforms online. That's where I think you want to be aiming most of your effort now. You want to keep the pressure off, constantly screaming at Zell on the news, because that's just not useful, because the Russians are not taking this deal. Ask them first, then ourselves, right? Because if the Russians aren't a yes, there's no freaking point what the Ukrainians think. Yeah. So get that off the front page. Get the hardcore negotiations about keeping those platforms online and supplied in play, and find out where that line is going to be so you can plan from it. Because otherwise you've got huge logistical problems coming your way.
That's so scary, honestly. That is like really scary scenario. I mean, you're so right about the lobbying thing, Rob, because I mean, it would even be just so bad for so many people in American, think of all these like sort of manufacturing facilities in Republican congressional districts in Republican states. Like it wouldn't be good for America to do this. There would be like, it would hit so many jobs in America. I mean, and American manufacturing jobs to do this. It would be crazy. But they seem very ideological, unfortunately.
Yeah, whether it's ideology or whether it's just reactive, I can't make a decision about that. But it's something you got to work around, right? Yeah. If you're making a 50-year procurement decision for your military right now, and you're Japan or Korea or Germany, massive spenders, Australia, you've got to figure out if Zell's getting served a massive rare earths deal for no forward gains, no security guarantee, to pay for stuff that's already been sent, right? What's the deal that you? Yeah. I mean, how do you?
I'm not as pessimistic. I'm not as pessimistic as that. I'm not as pessimistic as that. It's European. We are actually meeting the goals now. Finally, in artillery shell productions, we're there. The Ukrainians are meeting the goals of manufacturing most of the ammunition that they use on the front lines. This was a long-term strategy that took years to get to, but it worked out in the end. And he's going to be so pissed that I mentioned him here. I have a friend who works in asset management at Goldman Sachs, who drew up the portfolio for investment strategies after the Russian invasion, full-scale invasion in 2022. They bought a giant portfolio of Rheinmetall stocks. And they made so much money that he might actually now retire at the very old age of 32, which is, people, like, when you see where the investments are going, they're going into European arms manufacturers, to Leonardo in Italy, Dassault in France, Rheinmetall in Germany. We are gearing up. Rheinmetall is buying factories that used to make Volkswagens, which is kind of ironic because those Volkswagen factories used to make tanks in the 1930s, and now they're going back to making tanks again.
Wow.
But we are
It's
going
a good
to
point. I agree. I'm not that pessimistic either about. I think this is why I think the Ukrainians will overperform on the field. Some of
Yeah.
the pessimists, but it didn't have to be that way. If I was making predictions about arms stock investment in 2022, I would have been long on Lockheed and short on Rheinmetall because the Germans were nowhere, right?
Yeah.
That was not obvious, and it was not certain. It wasn't an on rails situation, right? Where German stocks were going to go really, really well on, and the French are, as a donor, like an appallingly terrible one, like per capita. They're one of the
That's
lowest.
bad. True.
Like they're really good talkers, right? But they're not great doers. The Germans are good doers and bad talkers. But a lot of the risk adjustment in 2022 is everyone in Europe was buying American because they're like, oh wow, these guys are here. Biden has showed up. He's throwing stuff into Ukraine, and a lot of that has now been wiped out. Right? That's just gone already.
Wow. Crazy.
I think it is something that should have been done earlier, to be honest with you. I was very upset with the decision to give the F-16 to Ukraine, which a lot of people don't get me on that. I believe it would have been far better if we had given them the Gripen, something made in Europe, or done the Mirage
they have
2000 earlier.
They have both.
Gripen already?
They do. They have both platforms. They have. There are European planes in service in Ukraine as well. The problem is the shortage of pilots more than the shortage. Ukraine made a structural, terrible decision not to commission foreigners, and this is something that I could talk all day about this, and I don't want to sledge the Ukrainians right now because it's such a bad time to be doing it.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of foreign pilot volunteers in 2022 and 3 that were told no. And so Ukraine was selecting from a pilot cadre of English-speaking pilots who were reasonably intelligent and were still alive, which was not a great pool to be trying to build an air force from, right?
Yeah.
And the British Air Force during the Royal Air Force during the Blitz was 20% Polish.
Yeah.
There is no good reason why 20% of the Ukrainian Air Force isn't foreign. But we live with that circumstance because the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense made some very cultural decisions about roles for Ukrainians and that have not come out well in the long term. But I don't want to be sledging them too hard for that because, like, at the end of the day, I'm massively for Ukraine, and they've made a massive transformation from being a Soviet military to being something that was then NATO in 2023 and is now completely something else now that everyone else should be learning from now. Their doctrine is in many ways in front. But I have to constantly remind myself that there is as much Soviet history in the Ukrainian armed forces as there is British history in the Australian one.
Yeah.
That doesn't go away tomorrow. That doesn't go away overnight.
There was maybe a month ago, there was a lot of talk about this offensive that Russia will launch, spring offensive or whatever you want to call it. Has it started? Because there hasn't been that much news about it, that much talk about it. I think I read somewhere that they are ramping up attacks around the whole zero line or the front lines. But I mean, I haven't really heard. Do you have any news on that or insights?
Well, certainly they have. It has started. They've been reasonably large. They had to reposition after Kursk, right? Because they had a lot of their forces around Kursk. Kursk was an impossible situation for the Ukrainians. They had one road in, and when it became in range of drones, there were just that many wire-guided drones going onto that road that it became impossible to sustain Ukrainian operations in Kursk. So the logistics of doing operations in Kursk, everyone's giving the Ukrainians a hammering over the performance in Kursk. It's just like there's one road, right? They couldn't magic a second and third road in that was outside of Russian artillery and drone range. But now the downside is the Russians are coming down the same one road, so they've got the exact problem in reverse. So that's heavily impeded Russian operations in Sumy. There was an assumption the Russians are going to flood Sumy. That hasn't happened. They've been trying really hard to the south of Pokrovsk to break through. They're up against the 59th, which is Ukraine's best drone assault unit. It's the world's first drone assault unit, and they're getting the absolute crap kicked out of them by the Ukrainians there.
We saw that, Rob.
We're with that unit. We're embedded with that unit. Those guys are weapons.
Maybe talk a little bit about that because I mean, you would know what stuff can actually be talked about publicly, and what we saw with the 59th was amazing.
Yeah, well, they're fully integrated. Cyber, electronic warfare, and drone capability, fully integrated, petition the front line and fully ready. The only shortage is ammo, more so than anything. There are maybe like 3 tree lines in Pokrovsk region that the Russians are desperately clinging on to for about 20, 30 kilometers of ground, and like living in those tree lines is hell on earth. Like the Russians are getting absolutely murdered there. And the 59th is insanely professional, very coordinated. It's a sign of what drone operations in Ukraine will look like, I think, in about 12 months' time, when all the other units have had a chance to learn those lessons, but not all of them have. A couple of really, like there are units that are just better at drone operations than others, like Third Assault, and Holodny Yar, others that are just, and then you have like the Ukrainian Marines that we embedded with in Kherson, Drew, who are just experts in their own terrain, right? Where they're just really good at they're not probably the world's best integrated operator unit like the 59th that could just deploy anywhere in Ukraine and have the same battlefield effect. But the guys in Kherson are just so specialist in that environment. Like the commander of that unit was an insurgent leader during the occupation and is now converted into being a coordinator for drone operations. So he knows that environment better than anybody. So you're kind of seeing this experimentation between kind of localization and standardization. Standardization is slowly winning, and that's having a massive impact on the ability to deny supplies to the Russians, combined with kind of this defense in depth of Ukrainian drones that are homemade. They're really transforming the battlefield, and they're digging more trenches. Like they didn't dig enough trenches in 2023, right? That was the 2023 and 4 battlefield results were lack of Ukrainian entrenching. They just didn't dig in hard enough, and I think they've corrected that.
Okay, I discussed with the person who has been an engineer who has been designing these fiber optic drones. Can you tell about them? I've even seen videos where there's so much of those like fiber optic cables and fishnets, so that the vehicles cannot even operate in this. Like there's too much shit on the ground. But maybe you can tell about this, like the evolution of drones and how they have really shaped the battlefield in the last 2-3 years.
Sure. So fiber optic drones are more of a niche, like people who are making predictions about fiber optics taking over the whole battlefield. I think that's premature. FPVs and others there are reasons fiber optics are not super dominant. Their loitering capacity is much lower. You break that fiber optic cable, you're in a world of hurt. Like we've seen them we were in a fiber optic drone manufacturing facility, Drew. Actually, we were in about 3 or 4 of them, watching the boys actually make them and build the munitions for it. Like the supply chain for it is real. They're very sophisticated. Most drones are still FPV. And the reason fiber optic drones have emerged, let's just discuss that, is because of electronic warfare. Russian approach to electronic warfare and Ukrainian approach is just to broadcast on as many antennas as hardcore as you can. Flood out the entire spectrum. Fiber optic drones are not subject to jamming in that same way because they can just go straight through because they're physically connected to something, so you can't jam them out of the sky. So that's the reason why they've risen over the last 6 months in prominence. They've become a way to get through the walls of EW. The downside is that they're much more vulnerable to being the cable actually breaking. I think there are further advancements you'll see in fiber optics because the Ukrainians are only just now working out that when you've got a fiber optic cable into a drone, the amount of data you can collect from that drone is so much greater than if you're broadcasting, because you're literally on a fiber optic connection. You can put better sensors on it. You can collect more in real time from it. You can put better camera systems on it without the same bandwidth limitations you have on other drone platforms. But you've seen, particularly in Kursk, where when that road became within range of FPV and fiber optic drones, the Russians were just able to fiber optic Ukrainian vehicles on that, and it just denied that road to Ukrainian logistics, which had a pretty significant impact on the need for Ukraine to pull out of that area because that one road was completely bisected. And you've seen the same with Ukraine using fiber optic drones to basically take out air defense interception systems and high value targets up and down the front line. to the point where you see fiber optics everywhere now. Like, yeah, they're not going to take over 100%. I don't think that's really possible. But they are a weapon that is having a massive battlefield effect at the moment.
One of the impressions that I got, at least I should talk just for myself, is that there is this competition, and that who will get the upper hand in this battlefield in general is the one who gets the edge in the drone development, in anti-drone drone tactics. How did you see that evolving over time, and who do you think is currently getting the edge, having the edge over the other?
So usually it's the Ukrainians that get the edge. They were the first to really build fiber optic drones. They were also the first to really stand up independent drone operations. They were the best. They were the first to build like Delta, Veja, Ochi platforms, which are the integrated kind of systems that give you the battlefield awareness. Drew's been in the command centers where you can see just how useful that is in terms of taking away surprise. I don't want to talk too much into the tech layer, but we can go as deep as you like if you want to talk without breaking the secrets up. But these platforms like Delta Veja, which just aggregate huge systems of camera feeds across the entire line of the front.
Everything.
That's insane. And then you have Damba, which is for electronic warfare, and there are actually competing platforms in Ukraine over as to which one will become the end battle management system for Ukraine. And then you'll see, I think the next wave will be to integrate different data sources into these platforms. So most of Ukraine's battle management system is based on the camera feeds of drones, because it's just, they've got lots of them. They need to manage them. But then you'll see them get towards becoming a real rival to the Palantir platforms when they're able to integrate other sources. So you'll see that's coming next, is that Ukrainians are integrating these other things into these platforms that allow them to increase the lethality. I won't go into too much detail. I don't want to give spoilers, but that's where I think the next phase is in the big data aggregation and really leveraging this platform that they built, which has this huge advantage in real-time strategy and real-time visibility over the battlefield. When they start juicing that for value, when they start using it to improve decision making, that's going to have the next wave of battlefield impact. So you've seen the initial thing like crappy Mavics. I've got one here from Chelsea. It's a Russian one. Then you've got these kind of home built ones. This was a gift from Sukarevsky. Then you have the fiber optic drones have come in next. And then you have things like Baba Yaga, the bigger droppers. Boy, I've had one of those drop near me. That's really loud. I was in Pokrovsk last year, and one of the units was like, "Hey, do you want to see our Baba Yaga?" And they just like pick it up, fly it over the hill, and drop. Bang. Okay. Make sure. Yeah, that was loud. That was some proper Ukrainian health and safety standards. And then you've kind of seen the heavy drone bombers. Those have been less useful in the long run, mostly because like bigger, more sunk cost, you're eroding some of the benefits of smaller and lower cost and scaling through large manufacturing. Then you've seen other cool experimental platforms like Queen of Hornets, which is actually a drone carrier, goes out, deploys lots of drones from the central point. The Queen of Hornets is a cool platform. Been to their headquarters. I've seen that platform in action.
How about that one that drops molten? You know that one that drops molten. I don't know how they do it, but it's that drone that they're using, and they're dropping like molten, basically fire on the Russians. It's crazy.
Thermite.
Yeah, the napalm drones.
Yeah,
thermite drones. Yeah. I mean, that's cool, but it's like not super scalable. And like if you're moving slowly across a tree line, someone's going to shoot your drone down, right? So it's like like the drone defense war is just as real, right? Where like most drones that are lost due to electronic warfare rather than being used. So I don't want to give up the real statistics, but like there's a lot of jamming on both sides and a lot of accidental jamming on both sides where like if you're a soldier in a trench and you see a drone come over, you don't check to see if it's got a Ukrainian flag. You just switch on electronic warfare and pull it out of the sky. Right? You just like panic, drop that drone. It might be going over you to strike a Russian. You don't know. So you just drop it. So there's a lot of this sort of loss of platform due to lack of coordination. I think they're going to tighten that up in the next kind of 6 months. That's where I'm seeing a lot of change in how Ukraine's doing battle management of drones and governance of drones. That's what Sukarevsky is trying to push out across the front line. Is more of a more concrete understanding of electronic warfare. and sharing of what frequencies are Russian operating on, and having better coordination. So I think whoever's going to tighten that decision-making cycle is going to get the next advantage on the battlefield. I think the Ukrainians are well in front on that.
Are we moving towards robot warfare, and what role does the AI play here? Because I mean, I know that it's been used to make, for example, Patriot system better with the use of AI, so they have become better at shooting down missiles. So is the future here that we saw in, I don't know, Terminator 2 or like, will robots fight these wars? Probably not for us, but will they be the kind of main fodder in the front lines and so on?
I think you're going to see AI more in the back end in target identification. So if you've got you've got a circumstance now where every drone in Ukraine is more or less integrated into a battle management system. You don't have enough eyes, so you've got thousands of people going through the footage, going like, "That's a tank, that's a dude. This guy's gone for a piss in the tree," and we've watched this. You sit in the headquarters and you watch the Russians walk up and down. You see the heavy platform, and then
we saw them on a quad bike. I wrote about this in my Substack thing. Like, we saw just 2 Russians on a quad bike doing a supply run to a tree line, and it was so strange just being able to watch that. And these guys probably, I mean, they were acting like they didn't realize they were under surveillance, and we're just sitting there in the command center hundreds of miles away. It's a strange thing. It really is strange. It's incredible.
But that target identification is currently being done by a manual process of humans, right? Yeah. But that's where AI is going to come in. There's a lot of Ukrainian companies that are training to do target identification. So I think AI is like, everyone jumps to the trigger, but actually that's the last thing to go on the battlefield. Right now, drones have actually strangely made the war more personal, because you don't see the artillery shell hit somebody, but you do see the drone. Like, there's a drone operator like deliberately watching it. He doesn't see the death because the camera goes out when it explodes, but he sees the guy
right before,
basically like have his last moment.
It's crazy.
And
we've all seen that footage. Yeah,
that's deeply personal, right? Yeah. That's not robotic.
Yeah.
That's actually more personalized than an artillery shell hitting somebody, even if the drone operator is further back. So,
and the way they operate as well, Rob, like they were telling us, like there will be times where there'll be Russian drones, for example, and they'll deliberately taunt guys, like, and the guys will have no chance. They know that they're about to be killed, and it'll just taunt them. Like it has like a really human characteristic, because there's obviously a human being on the other side of it. It's
so
scary.
I do think we're seeing robotics, but I don't think we're seeing autonomous triggers yet. Just we're not there yet. But we are seeing drones take over the battlefield. The majority of casualties now coming from drones. Second is artillery. So that's obviously changed warfare, but not in ways we haven't seen it changed before. I don't think it's that different to a JDAM strike on some dude's house. It's just cheaper and more efficient.
Mm. What was your main impression with Sukharevsky, the commander of the main drone forces? I wrote about this in the Substack. Like, I shook his hand and I didn't realize it was actually the main commander of all the entire Ukrainian drones. It was only really later I worked out how important he was. But yeah, you literally went and had a meeting, and I was sort of like just waiting outside. But what was it like? Yeah, tell us about Sukharevsky. He's a really interesting figure. I
think Ukraine is like changing the definition of what military service looks like. So if you serve with when you're in bed with Ukrainians, there's a lot of things that we're used to seeing in military service that we don't see in Ukrainian armed forces. Like a couple of things like weapons handling. I've never seen a weapon that was unloaded, even if I'm in Lviv. Scares the hell out of me. Just take the magazine out until you need to. All right, just don't accidentally shoot your mate. All right, like there's that lack of discipline, but then that lack of discipline in the drone operations, like it's half startup, half Air Force, right? So you've got beanbag couches, PlayStations, and drone controllers. And one thing that really struck me about Sukharevsky that was totally not Soviet in thinking. This is if you think of the 180 you have to do to get to this level of thinking about humans.
Yeah.
Every drone operator in Ukraine.
We should say quickly, we should say quickly
has
as well.
the
His
same
background.
is the same
he's-
chair. Hold on, they've all got
Same
the
what?
same computer chairs, right?
Yeah.
And you can be in a when you're in a trench in Pokrovsk, like we're in the drone trench in
Yeah.
Pokrovsk, or we're in a bunker, right? Like,
They have chairs
got
like
a gaming
this.
chair. They got a gaming chair,
Literally like this, yeah.
right, for that dude, right?
Yeah, it's
and it's the
amazing.
same chair that's in the headquarters, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
whole
it's pretty
integrated thing has put, and I got really stuck on this for a good reason. It's because the Soviets don't give a shit about what your chair is, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's true.
Shukarovsky knows what the most valuable thing in his unit is. It's the experienced drone operators, and he knows
Yeah.
that keeping them operating for hours at a time, if it costs an extra few $100 to make sure they've got the same chair that Pekka's got, then that's a worthwhile investment. That is the opposite of Soviet thinking.
Yeah, it really is. That's so true. Sorry, Rob. I was just gonna say, like,
Sorry.
just for listeners at home, Sukharevsky. It's a pretty amazing fact. He was literally the guy who called in the first ever Ukrainian, like, live fire round in 2014. So when Gherkin went into Slovyansk, he was the officer who told one of the machine gunners on an APC to actually open fire. It was actually Shukarev, which is crazy. Like, he's the guy who was the first officer to command a Ukrainian to go shoot at a Russian in 2014. So just
Okay.
crazy.
This conversation, I think it could go on for hours, and it would be just as interesting as it has been so far. So I think, Rob, we have to do this again when you
should
have
do it
time.
regularly. I love that.
But we're gonna wrap up here. I would like to hear final thoughts from Joe.
None. I'm giving it all to Rob. I have nothing to add. Yeah. I don't like how we do that, to be honest. The thing that we do where everyone gets
Yeah, I
a
know.
final
That's
word.
why I do it.
So
I know.
the
I know you
guest
hate
always
it.
has the most interesting thing to say. That's just.
I'm gonna go to Drew then. Final
Oh,
thoughts.
I was just gonna say, having gone to Ukraine with Rob and amazing opportunities, being able to just like randomly shake the hand of Shukarensky and everything. Like, what I saw was incredible, and I'm so lucky that Rob's joined us and shared a lot of really interesting information, because it's such an amazing antidote to the kind of like massive doomers. Like that guy I was debating the other day, Willie OAM, who was just like, there's literally no hope. We should all just give up and kill ourselves. Listening to Rob, who's actually in Ukraine, like, you see that they're like, first of all, their indigenous capacity is pretty amazing. Like, and just, the perseverance is incredible. So like, that's just stuff that they're not counting on. So yeah, I appreciate you coming in, Rob. It was really interesting. Like,
No, great. Thanks for having me. You guys are at the public face of where the Russians are winning the most, which is online, right? Like,
crazy, dude. Like
they're taking more territory on X than they have in Ukraine, mate.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the sad reality is, like, it has real world effects, because like all these guys in the Republican administration, like, they're living within the sort of like ideological bubble of like X, where all this stuff is just completely dominant Russian narratives.
Yeah, I just think the one thing I push back most on about a lot of the commentators is stop making decisions for Ukrainians about where they should fight and how they should fight, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've met frontline Ukrainian guys. Let them decide when they quit. And let's just give them the backup they need. I'm not there to make decisions for them. I support. Like, I'm not a decision maker in the Ukrainian government. I'm maybe a minor influencer in the Aussie one, and I'm a reasonably credible researcher for the work that we're doing there. And my thing is, like, what do you need, guys? What can I do to help? All right, you need tanks? All right, I'm gonna go bend countries and try and get tanks. You need Air Force? I'll do that. You need better support for logistics? I got you. You need better big data? I got you. Right? Just the main effort is, like, don't just sit. I get very kind of impatient with people who just like make predictions and sit on and build large followings making predictions about what's going to happen next. Like, I really like Vatnik Soup because it actually helps, right? It actually helps get people make better decisions about the information they're presented with. I like what you do, Drew, because you actually lean in to these things. I'm sorry we haven't met before, but the risk for me is, how do I help? What do you need? And how can I lean in and do my bit? I can give advice about how to max Ukrainian diplomacy on supply chain. Like, and cool. I used to work for Department of Foreign Affairs. I have some standing to do that, but I'm not going to say you must do it this way, right?
Yeah.
When the F-18 deal went to custard, because Ukraine didn't want to have foreign pilots and they had more planes at that stage and they had pilots to fly them, I didn't go, oh yeah, I'm out. You're not going to work with me on my terms, Ukraine, I'm out. No, I sat with it and kept helping. And there's a lot of people who just like get the shits up at Ukraine because Ukraine makes a decision that they wouldn't have made. And then they're suddenly like, oh, no, it's all on my terms. It's like, no, it's on your terms. It's your country. It's your war. You can lose it if you want to. You can win it, right? I'm just here to help.
There are a lot of armchair Western generals, which is like, yeah, really annoying. And it sucks because like they make this claim that everyone in Ukraine wants to stop. The only people keeping them going is the West. But honestly, the reality is like probably like the West has been like, I mean, we stepped up right at the start, but there's been so much foot dragging. Like so many Western governments would just preferred like, remember there was the, very real contention that right at the start of the war, Germany didn't want to send in arms to Ukraine because they were like, oh, well, it'll be a 3-day thing. And it was like people in the German government probably wanted it to be a 3-day thing, right?
Well, some of them were getting paid to hope that way, but like Schroeder's a traitor. Like, deal with him later.
Yeah.
But so just finally, all I'd add on that is that whenever I'm feeling down about it, because in Kyiv, it's politics and diplomacy all day long, right? And influences and chances and weird people who blow through this town and you never see them again, and they make lots of promises to Ukrainians. Every time I get down with that, I just go to the front and I talk to the boys, right? And I let them set my standard of march. The best people in Ukraine are not online. The best people in Ukraine are not even in the Ukrainian government. The best people in Ukraine are at front.
Yeah.
All the best ones. So if you're sitting in Lviv, listen to some grandfather who accidentally retired from the SBU in 2014 about how the war's going to go, like cut that away. Go talk to the boys that are fighting, because don't talk to draft dodgers that bolted in the first days of the war and will do anything for Ukraine except live there. They want to litigate language nonsense and strange identity politics and whatever Panzer division their great grandfather served in, and who cares a shit? Like talk to the boys at the front. Those guys, most of them are going to fight to zero rather than give up their country.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than let their children live under Russian occupation. Go talk to them. Those are the guys that set my pace.
Facts.
I think that's the best way to end this podcast episode. A fantastic episode, in my opinion. Let's continue with you, Rob, on another episode, hopefully. But right now, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks.
Yeah.
No problem.
Thanks, guys.
For your time. You've been very generous.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.